I'm glad to get the opportunity to talk again on this bill that doesn't make any sense. And first of all, I have to say, the people that fought for our country back in 1916 and over 100 years ago, they were glad that what they fought for was one of the things, that freedom of speech and freedom to express an opinion. To me, that seems to be, there seems to be a different emphasis now, rather than those two vital aspects of what I would call common sense law and a fair and just, and to be fair and just to the people that we're representing. Since talk about this hate speech bill started back over a year ago or more, I don't know exactly, but the last time it came through here anyway, I was against it, my group was against it, but we were only a handful. And it wasn't until the public got to know what was happening at that stage, and there was a vote here, and there was only 6 or 7 of us that voted against it. And that's the truth. And then it maddened me sometime, maybe 6 months ago or more, when I just happened to come in late at night some night, and I see Lisa Chambers boasting about that what they had changed in the Senate in relation to the bill. The facts were, she was kind of more or less blaming the TDs here inside the Dáil, but her own party members voted for the hate speech bill as it was being presented at that time. They were part of the government, they were part of many others here on my right that were in favour of it at that time, but it wasn't until they looked deeper into it and they see that they had a mistake made, and until the calls kept coming in to my office and Michael's office and all the other members' offices to get an understanding, and were vicious about what was happening. And they let it be known, I know they left it be known to the government members as well. And you see, the people out there don't trust you in relation to this. It is one of the calls that I get practically every week, even though maybe the matter has gone cool there for a bit. But it's one of the calls I got, and I have several texts, even in recent times, not to support this bill. And you see, the facts are, Minister, the people don't trust you now. Whatever wording you have changed, they don't depend on you that he'll stick to that. And the people just don't trust you in relation to this bill. And there has been calls here before I got up to park this bill until the new government comes in. And we'll be still, if we get elected, if I get elected, I'll be opposed to this bill, because we have had a democratic state for the last 100 years, or probably more. What was wrong with it? Why are you trying to change it? Why are you trying to shut people up? Why are you trying to deny them the right to talk? No one knows exactly who this will extend to until the bill is brought forward. I'm sure then the Gardaí will have to do what they're asked to do and challenge people in the courts or take them into the courts until the last place in the world that the people that I represent want to go is into court. And you see, there's so many, all the parties seem to be for this, and by changing a small bit, that doesn't satisfy me. That doesn't satisfy the people in Kerry that I represent, and I won't be voting for this bill, because there's suspicion hanging over you as to what you're at or what you're trying to do. But it doesn't seem to be that it's going to help the ordinary people to retain their democratic right to express freedom of speech or to express an opinion. I don't see why you're trying to muzzle the people in this way or to put them down. There's no need in the world for it, and I will be voting against it again this time, because the people simply don't trust you, and I don't trust you either. Thank you very much.
Thank you to deputies for their comments and their views. I suppose, Deputy, you ask what is the point and why are we here? We're here because I fundamentally believe that we need to have hate crime legislation on our statute, and we don't. And I've said it at the outset, and it's not that I've been forced or pushed into a particular route, but I believe that we had a consensus very clearly in this House. There was a very strong consensus for the previous legislation. We lost that consensus, and I believe that instead of not enacting any element of it, I wanted to ensure that hate crime was for the first time put on statute here. We're the last country across Europe to have it or to not have it, and I absolutely believe that we need to have it. So we're here to make sure that we have for the first time on our statute books hate crime legislation, but I do believe that we need to do more to update and to amend and to improve the 89 Act. The 89 Act will still exist, it is still there, we will still have incitement legislation, and many of the points that people have raised here, and indeed in the Shannon in the debate last summer, where people thought it would be the end of the world, they were talking about elements that have been in law since 1989. So yes, I absolutely accept there are different ways that this could have been done, but I fundamentally believe that we need to have hate crime legislation on our statute books, and that's why we're here this evening, that's why I'm progressing this, and that's why I hope at a later stage we will be able to address the elements of the incitement to hatred and violence elements that were taken out. To speak directly to Deputy Howland's point and to the question around the technicalities of it, fundamentally, the point here is that I believe we need to keep the incitement to hatred and violence element together and to progress it together at a later stage, and obviously that will be in the next all. But the technical element of how the amendment is drafted, so the proposal relates to the definition of hatred as currently drafted in the bill, and this is hatred, which means hatred against a person or a group of persons in the state or elsewhere on account of their protected characteristics or any one of these characteristics. However, because the term protected characteristics does not appear in the 89 Act, applying this definition to hatred to the constructed term that's in the Prohibition of Incitement to Hatred Act of 89 would not have the legal effect without also defining the protected characteristics themselves. So except it is a technical element to it, but the overall basis here is that I genuinely believe that we need to progress that piece together and as a whole, and I don't like the fact that we might have two separate definitions or characteristics for both pieces of legislation, but that's why I think that we need to make sure that for the next government and for the next all that we have a structure in place to make sure that we can update the legislation. Deputy Daly referred to recklessness. Again, this was included in the incitement to hatred provisions, which have already been removed, and I think in general there were broad support for them anyway as they passed through the bill. Deputy Barry spoke about the demonstration test and people who are demonstrating in general. I mean, it's really important to point out here, we're talking about where a crime has already been committed. So if somebody's at a protest for whatever reason, if they're not protesting peacefully and if they're committing a crime, they're already committing a crime. We're talking about making sure where there's an aggravating factor of hate, that is taken into consideration as well. There was discussion about possession of material. Again, that's something that's already in the 89 Act. That's something in law. Just to maybe speak to some of the two areas that people have referenced quite significantly, and that is around the definitions, the definition of hatred and gender. And maybe to note, Deputy Carsey did not put in any amendments in relation to either of these. Firstly, and I outlined this to the Shannon, but it's important to outline it here again. One of the key criticisms is that hatred has not been defined in this bill. And I want to explain to the House why this is the case. When drafting new legislation, a comparative exercise is undertaken to examine how other jurisdictions have legislated for a particular topic. This exercise was undertaken in developing this bill at great length, I would add, given that we are one of the last countries in the Western world to provide for hate crime laws, as I've mentioned. There's therefore a great body of comparative legislation available worldwide, and I can say that no other jurisdictions have defined hatred. Similar legislation from many different jurisdictions around the world have been examined, and hatred is not defined in any of them. Some jurisdictions use synonyms for hatred such as hostility or ill will or malice, such as is the case in England and Scotland, but again these terms are not defined. In addition, the framework decision of 2008 on combating racism and xenophobia that Ireland is required to transpose, that I referred to earlier on, does not define hatred. It states that hatred should be understood as referring to hatred based on race, colour, religion, descent, or national or ethnic origin. And again, a suggestion that we use the definition of gender in the Equal Status Act. There's no definition of gender in the Equal Status Act. This is exactly in line with the approach that we are taking in this bill. The definitions of hatred proposed by many deputies and indeed by senators previously are based on hatred which is used for policy and advocacy purposes through the ECRI. It's not intended for legislation. And just to be clear, my officials and I expressly contacted the ECRI, who confirmed that it was never intended for inclusion in criminal legislation. On the contrary, they've made it very clear that this definition is only intended to inform policy and to offer guidance. I've been strongly advised also by the Attorney-General against the use of the ECRI definition on the basis that attaching different words to the definition with the aim of explaining hatred would then require an explanation for each of these constituent words. So we have the Deputy across, Deputy Carthy, saying that we need simple and clear definitions. What they are proposing are the terms opprobrium, enmity or detestation. Now, as far as I'm concerned, these are not commonly understood concepts in the same way that hatred is. They do not provide any additional precision. They could leave the legislation vulnerable to constitutional challenge on the basis that the offences become excessively broad, vague, uncertain and inconsistent with the rule of law. They're certainly not words, most of them, that I would use on a daily basis. The Attorney-General also advised that it's not possible or appropriate to provide exhaustive definitions of every term in the legislation. Additionally, if these type of amendments were accepted, each one of the proposed terms would have to be proven beyond reasonable doubt in order for a court to secure a conviction. This would mean that on top of providing that the person committed the offence, the DPP would have to prove that the individual concerned demonstrated opprobrium, enmity or detestation, was biased, prejudiced, held contempt, was hostile and was a bigot. This would place an almost impossible burden on the prosecution. We want to make sure that we're enacting legislation that can actually be workable. In essence, I believe that for the purpose of this legislation, many of the terms proposed to define hatred are simply more obscure words which are more likely to confuse a jury in the course of a criminal prosecution than the widely understood term of hatred. This is a view that's also shared by the Office of the DPP. The definition of hatred as currently set out in the bill represents the words ordinary and everyday meaning, and I think we can all understand what it means. The person who attacks a person leaving a gay club for no other reason other than they hate gay people can be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law and labelled the hate criminal that they are. The person who attacks a person simply because of the colour of their skin and clearly demonstrates that can be labelled the hate criminal that they are. There will be no legal uncertainty as to what constitutes a hate offence, as hatred will have its ordinary and everyday meaning, and this reflects the rules of statutory interpretation which the Supreme Court has also consistently upheld, and it's for those reasons that we have not changed it, because I believe this is the correct approach. Separately, in terms of the definition of gender, again something that really I believe so many people are missing the point of here. This is not about somebody's legal definition. If somebody's being attacked, they're not being asked, well, do you have a gender cert? They're not being asked, well, is this your gender? What is your gender? They're being attacked because of who they are. And I think people are missing the point here. It does not affect the Gender Recognition Act, just to say that clearly, the Civil Registration Act, or any other acts on the statute book. And I want to be very clear and ensure that everyone understands this. The definition of gender provided for in this bill is for the specific purposes of this bill, and that is again to protect our citizens from hate crime. And we can have different definitions. We have legislation previously where we have 3 different definitions for children in the one piece of legislation. So it's not to say that this immediately impacts on others. We know in particular that members of our LGBTQI communities experience disproportionate levels of harassment, abuse and violence. We know that members are targeted for the way they look, for the way they dress, the way they identify, and of course the people that they love. We know that it is precisely the people who do not fit into conventional ideas of gender and sexuality who are most vulnerable to this kind of victimisation. This legislation is vital and it is long overdue. Our statistics on hate crime and hate-related incidents have risen year on year across Europe. Harassment and violence against LGBTQI people is increasing, and the Council of Europe has noted a marked increase in hate speech and hate crime targeting people and organisations based on sexual orientation, on gender identity and sex characteristics. This has also been documented by the EU's Fundamental Rights Agency. Prejudice in 2024, a survey of more than 100,000 LGBTQI people across Europe provides a snapshot of the scale of discrimination, bullying, harassment and violence that members of this community face. More than half of surveyed respondents were victims of hate-motivated harassment. Ireland is no different. Over half of the respondents in the EU survey say that prejudice and intolerance in Ireland has increased, while 2 in 3 say that violence in Ireland has increased. In the year before the EU survey, more than half of those surveyed had been harassed, 1 in 20 had been attacked. These numbers illustrate the scale of the problem, but they do not adequately convey the impact of these incidents on the victims themselves and on the broader LGBTQI community. They send a message to these people that they are unsafe simply because of who they are. This is not about their legal status, this is about who they are as people. The psychological impact of hate crime is much deeper than regular crime as well. Hate crimes dehumanise people. It goes to the heart of a person's identity. It damages their dignity and it forces people to change their behaviours and hide who they are. This is not a vanity project. This is people's lives that we're talking about here. The objective of the legislation is to provide protection to victims of hate crime on the basis of personal identity characteristics. These include gender, sex characteristics and sexual orientation. And the approach that we've taken here, it's deliberately inclusive to ensure that we are adequately capturing the individuals and the communities that we know are targeted by these crimes. Inclusion, if this broader meaning, was on foot of recommendations from the civil society organisations, but in particular those who are representing vulnerable and minority groups. The broad definition of gender ensures protection for transgender persons as well as for non-binary persons and other people who do not identify with any of the terms expressly included in the legislation. And I think it's important, if I could, just to outline a couple of cases that we're talking about here, because we're not talking about it in the abstract, we're talking about very real people. This is the Anti-Gender and Anti-Sexual Orientation Crime Report from An Garda Síochána. And just to outline some of the cases here, firstly, we have a robbery from an individual. The injured party was with a group of friends when a group of 3 to 5 individuals began intimidating the person in question. This is a transgender person. The person attempted to evade these individuals, was pursued, was punched 3 times to the face and pushed to the ground. Their runners and hoodie were taken. At least 2 youths, 1 male and 1 female, were involved. Once Gardaí arrived, the person in question had a cut lip, loose lower front teeth, visible grazes to the left arm. This was hate crime. This was motivated by a person's hatred because they were anti-transgender. They didn't single out any other individual in the group, just the person that was transgender. A second to outline. A female was on the way to the market with 2 friends and was attacked by a man physically who threw his body at her with all of his strength. The person asked him what was he doing. He said that she was nothing more than a man. Again, he repeated several times, saying she was nothing more than a trans. These are real incidents. These are real people. These are people who are being targeted simply because of who they are. This is not a discussion about gender or somebody's legal status. These are facts. These are people who are already impacted by hate crimes. And what we are simply doing by this legislation, and it's not just about gender, it's about individuals who are being attacked and targeted because of the colour of their skin, because of the fact that they might have a disability, because of the fact that they come from a different country to where we've been born. There are many reasons as to why people are being targeted. We know that it has a greater impact on a person. We know that targeting somebody simply because of who they are as a person has a greater impact on them. That is why this law is being passed. And I think it's really important to be clear here, because there's either intentional or otherwise objective here to try and misconstrue that we're still changing the hate speech legislation. Let me be very clear for anybody's social media or clips that they want to put out. We're not amending the 89 Act. I've been very clear that that's been progressed at a later stage. We are talking about hate crime. We are making sure that where a crime has already been committed, where it's motivated by hatred of a particular person and their characteristics, who they are as a person, that there will be an increased sentence and an increased penalty, because we know that it has a greater impact on those individuals. And I think as a country, as a society, we need to be very clear that it's not something that we're going to tolerate. So I firmly believe that this legislation needs to be enacted this evening. I absolutely believe that we need to come back to the hate speech element of it. Again, I'm stressing I made that decision, but I made it because I wanted to ensure that this element of the bill was enacted. But I do believe that we need to come together as an Oireachtas, as a Dáil, however many of us are back after the election, to make sure that we can update the 89 legislation. But let's send a very clear message to those who are vulnerable in our communities at the moment that we will not tolerate any form of violence or intimidation or crime against you simply because of who you are. That is what we're doing here this evening. That is all we're doing, deputies. We're sending a very clear message that if you target someone because of who they are, that you will face a stronger penalty. And I think we need to send that message out here this evening. Thank you.
Very much, Joan. I'll be very brief. Look, the bill that was passed in 1989 passed because it was explained thoroughly what the people, the members here inside were voting. It was proper and right. It was done the right way. But he putting no limits or no restrictions on what people, what things you're actually hitting at. It's an open book. And I can tell you, Minister, the people of Ireland don't trust you enough to give you an open book. And that's what you're asking for in this case, by not in this debate, because you're not explaining fully what the bill will mean for all the different things. You're limited to certain, you're not, you said there you wouldn't put a wording that it be covered, and that would cover everything. That's wrong. You should do what you should put it out before the people what you're at, because they don't trust what you're at. And we don't trust what you're at. And in that regard, I can't vote for this bill or motion or whatever it is here tonight, because I don't trust you, and the people of Ireland don't trust you. And I will say it again, people are entitled to free speech and to express their opinion, and like, I didn't say hatred, or I didn't interrupt you. Any of us don't condone hatred of any creed or description, but it can be interpreted different when the laws are being enforced, when you're not explaining totally what you're actually hitting at, because you're covering everything with this. We don't know what we can say or what we can do, but he'll find a way to cover it in. And then a fella will pay the piper if the tune doesn't suit. So I can't see how we expect to ram this through here tonight, or how it can be fair. And here at the end of your tether, let the next government, we'll debate in the next government if we're here. But you haven't been fair to the people. You tried to ram it through here, the whole lot of it, except for a few independents, or number of independents here.
Thank you, Deputy Healy-Rae.